and welcome once again to SuperConnectivity Corrections Edition. I am, as always, your host, Charlie, the Professor Usher, and with me once again is my main sidekick, my main man.
I can't wait to hear this, Phil Parrish.
Yay! Okay, so as you may recall, last week I went for a bit on a bit of a rant about the Infinity Stones we've seen so far. And as it turns out, I was wrong. I had insisted that from everything we've seen, and gave what I thought was a rather cogent argument to that effect, that the Aether was the Power Stone, and the stone in the orb was the Soul Stone. However, as it turns out, Marvel, in the Avengers Age of Ultron Blu-ray Special Edition, there is a featurette, which I was able to find on YouTube, where they basically go over what the stones are, and in which they do declare officially from Marvel MCU authority that the Aether is in fact the Reality Stone, and the orb is the Power Stone. Now, this was brought to my attention by Arnold Costales. Arnold, loyal listener, who I am eternally grateful to for correcting me, because I will be honest with you, if I am ever wrong and you correct me in my wrongness, I will acknowledge your rightness. I'm not a man who is bound by its ego to say, no, I must be right, I must be right. And Arnold, thank you for correcting me. I really appreciated that, and I hope you enjoy being called out on the show, and I hope you keep on listening. And anyone else there, who ever hears that I say something that you disagree with, feel free to shout it out and say, no, I'm wrong, and here's why. Now, all that said, I do want to make a couple quick points here. Basically, I think Marvel is wrong. And let me tell you why. Now, of course, Marvel isn't wrong in the sense that Marvel can't be wrong because they're the ones making this decision. But I kind of get the feeling that Marvel wanted to define what the stones were and kind of back themselves into a corner when they started when they decided that they were going to name the Space Stone and the Mind Stone. They kind of had to name the other stones as well. And I think they kind of landed upon some things without thinking it through as much as they could have. Because basically in the featurette, they're discussing this, and they say, the Aether is the Reality Stone because it is the Reality Stone because it has the ability to change the reality of something from a regular matter to a dark matter universe. So that's why that's the Reality Stone. They never really explained why the Power Stone is the Power Stone, except that, look how powerful it is. And then, when they're doing this, then they say, and then the next two remaining are the Time Stone and the Soul Stone. And the person who's discussing this thing and how are you going to represent that? That they hadn't really thought of how they were going to represent that yet. And to me, it seems like they missed their opportunity, because I think that the orb, because in the clip that they show there, they actually call out the fact that the orb is dangerous to organic life. And they do use the word power there, because they say the more organic life, the larger the power surge that is released when it destroys it. But of course, as I said before, when you're talking about life, you're talking about things with souls. So I really feel they missed their opportunity to make the orb the Soul Stone. I can go along with saying the Aether's the Reality Stone. I really feel that they just demonstrated it to be the Power Stone, but it can be the Reality Stone as well. That's fine. It's no skin off my nose. But I think that if they're having difficulty declaring what these stones are, and honestly, I think the Reality Stone is kind of the harder stone to name. So if you want to say the Reality Stone with its ability to convert matter is the Reality Stone, that works well. But I do think that you have a better explanation for Soul Stone in saying that it destroys organic life, and so it's pulling their souls from it, yada, yada, yada. But of course, maybe they felt that wasn't visual enough with the way that the Soul Stone was working. So anyway, but the official statement from Marvel is that the orb is the Power Stone, the Aether is reality, space and time, or space and mind are pretty straightforward, pretty self-explanatory, leaving us the Time Stone and the Soul Stone. Now, Marvel, just remember, even though you said it in a featurette, it's not canon until it's in the movie. So Marvel could always correct this retroactively if they decide they want to do that. If they realize that, oh, you know what, Charlie was right. It's much better to say the orb was the Soul Stone, and that we don't have to figure out what to do with the Soul Stone. Because, of course, as we've said before, the Soul Stone presents its own problems, specifically in the Chinese market. It's an interesting aspect of the Chinese market that they do not allow stories of the supernatural. So anything that is magic in the Chinese market has to be restructured as some sort of super advanced science, which is what they're essentially doing with everything. That they really are trying to present it, as much as a scientific backdrop as possible, which is why leading into Doctor Strange, I think that we are getting I think a lot of what Doctor Strange is going to be is a lot of Doctor Strange sort of explaining why the magic is actually science. That is my thinking on it, and I think that is a lot of what we're going to see in it. What is most interesting is that Feige has come out and pretty much said the Eye of Agamotto is the Time Stone. They have really kind of hammered into this, but what was interesting because they have really been doing a lot of data dumps on everything that's coming up, and doing a lot of data dumps, I felt, on Doctor Strange. I think they maybe feel that Doctor Strange is getting overshadowed, and they are going to sort of get out ahead of it and put out some interesting, tantalizing teasers out there for Doctor Strange. And one of the ones they did was they were discussing that the Eye of Agamotto works, and this is very interesting, that it messes with time. So they're pretty much, and this is what they're saying, we're not saying it's the Time Stone, but it's going to be something that's manipulating time. But what was interesting is how they decided to have it manipulate time is they gave it the Scarlet Witch's old powers, which is that it alters probability by creating retroactive reality manipulation in the past, so that when you get to the future, things happen the way they do because of what we've previously established by altering the timeline of the Eye of Agamotto. And for what it's worth, as I said back in a very early SuperConnectivity, I actually think that there is going to perhaps be a tie-in to Thor and the idea of Odin's eye, because of course Odin lost his eye in order to gain the second sight of time, and so I think the Eye of Agamotto and Odin are going to be tied together in that, because of course I think maybe sacrificing his eye to have access to the Time Stone will be sort of part of that storyline in there, and that's how they're going to tie Thor into Doctor Strange and lead us into Ragnarok. So I would not be surprised to see that that's exactly how that's going to play out. But pulling away from the stones for a bit, because I mean, like I said, I stand corrected, and I am willing to accept Marvel's official statement, although, as I say, they still have time to fix themselves and bring them in line with my sense of the universe.
It's wrong, but he accepts it.
Let me put it this way. I am wrong in the sense that Marvel has not yet accepted my vision of reality.
All right, Dr. Doom.
Yes. You will not question Doom's perspective. No, but it's and it's actually kind of more fun when it is fun to be wrong, because now what I get to do is I get to see, okay, so that's going to be, so like I say, so making the Aether the Reality Stone, I get it, because we're altering the nature of reality, we're altering the nature of matter, so we're going to convert what should have been, as from the elves' perspective, what should have been dark matter the whole time, we're going to convert this light matter into dark matter, and that's going to be good for us. So I can get behind that idea. I can work with that. The orb is the Power Stone. It still doesn't make any sense, Because if it is the Power Stone, why does Peter Quill see his mother? To me, that's like the whole thing. He sees his mother there. Is that just supposed to be a hallucination because he's overwhelmed by the power?
That's what I was thinking. Maybe it's just a hallucination.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of, I don't know. To me, that's a little weird. To me, you know what? Just to call a shelter half an entrenching tool. To me, what it looks like is Marvel was going to make it the Soul Stone, and then they got to the Chinese market, and the Chinese market said, "Oh, there's no such thing as souls. We're sorry. That's supernatural thinking, and we don't allow supernatural thinking in our market." And Marvel said, "What? Souls? No, it's a hallucination. That's the Power Stone because it's so powerful." Yeah. So that's my take on it. Is Marvel sort of like had to backtrack from what they were originally going to have it be to make it into something that could play in the Chinese market, and they just grabbed the most random stone they could since they weren't allowed to do the Soul Stone, which is why, again, I think we're not getting the Soul Stone in Doctor Strange, which everyone said, oh, of course, Doctor Strange will have the Soul Stone. No, Doctor Strange is getting the Time Stone, and they made a great way to make it work. They said, well, what was another magical character we had? The Scarlet Witch. What was her power? Oh, she manipulated timelines. Perfect. Put it in there. And now they're stuck with the Soul Stone because they still got to get to it. But they've got to figure out a way that they can have a stone that does something soul-like that we can still sell in the Chinese market. Actually, you know what? Here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's my big prediction. I think they're going to call it a wash, and they're going to put the Soul Stone in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they can put the Soul Stone in there. They don't have to call it the Soul Stone. When they sell it to the Chinese market in reruns, they can just call it the next Power Stone we have found, And they don't have to call it the Soul Stone, but they can actually call it the Soul Stone in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., do Soul stuff with it, not have to worry about it being recouped in the Chinese market, and then bring that next sixth stone in. Oh, good thing we found that sixth stone there on Earth right here. And
maybe the Soul Stone can resurrect Ward so he can be Taskmaster.
Yay! Oh, yeah. Well, Ward Taskmaster is in the Marvel Universe now. That is the other big news out of something. Someone has declared that now Taskmaster, who was apparently, I guess, I'm not quite sure. I think Taskmaster was like at Fox, but Fox didn't use him. So now Fox.
But why?
Well, because they couldn't fit him in because he's not technically a mutant.
He was not officially package deal.
Although his original storyline fit mutation just fine. He was a kid who suddenly realized he had photographic reflexes. I'm not quite sure why they didn't use him. I guess probably because there were just so many mutants they had to use. That's sort of the thing, is that they have to use these characters or they do lose them.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I just wonder why Taskmaster was at Fox in the first place, because he wasn't an X-Men character or Fantastic Four.
I think it might have been one that they had bought sort of piecemeal.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe he's like he was part of a package deal or something.
Yeah, well, that kind of stuff happens all the time. Where there's that, like, didn't they have Daredevil at one point? Who produced their first Daredevil movie?
Was it Fox? I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought it was Fox, but anyway. But yeah, so it's like they have they get these different companies back when Marvel was selling these things off like they were going out of style. Back when New Line Cinema bought them, and then New Line Cinema kind of imploded. Well, not New Line Cinema. What was it was the guys who produced a bunch of Marvel movies for back in the 80s for the very B Marvel movies. Anyway, it wasn't New Line, but it was something like that, like New World Cinema.
New Dimension or something, or
anyway, it had a weird little globe as its logo. I remember that. Anyway, and when that imploded, then all these characters kind of got tossed out to the wind, and Marvel couldn't buy them all back yet because they hadn't been bought by Disney yet. So anyway, so Taskmaster is now back at Marvel, arguably. Of course, it wasn't that long ago someone said the Fantastic Four is back at Marvel, and it's like, no. So if Taskmaster is not back at Marvel, then Taskmaster is over wherever Taskmaster is. Although Taskmaster, he's mostly a Avengers villain, so again, I don't know how he wound up Fox, except that he might have gotten picked up in some package,
Yeah.
And you know what happens is like when they first buy this, they get one writer who says, "Oh, and here are the characters we absolutely need to have," and then that writer's script, they say, "We don't want to do this script," and then they already have the characters because they got them as part of the deal, and then they just sort of sit there and they don't know what to do with them because later versions of it they don't introduce that character because maybe someone had as they're like in their fifth picture we're going to fight the Taskmaster. So don't plan these things out that far in advance, kids. You just wind up wasting money. So yeah, so Ward could now be the Taskmaster. And how they do the Soul Stone, we'll have to see. Although, hey, it's a hey, you know who they could resurrect with the Soul Stone, and Rob will like this. They can bring
Lucy
back
Lawless. Lucy Lawless,
yes,
yeah.
The Soul Stone can bring her back. There we go. So this is my new prediction. So Soul Stone is either going to get introduced in one of the Netflix series, although that might be a good place to put it, is on the Netflix, because then they can bring it in through Iron Fist, which has a mystical element, or they could have Doctor Strange bring it in the Defenders film. They do a Defenders thing,
Oh, sweet Christmas.
So those are options. They can introduce it on Netflix. They can introduce it in one of their ABC TV properties. But I get the feeling that they're basically what I'm getting the feeling is that they kind of wanted the orb to be the Soul Stone, but realized they couldn't sell it in the Chinese market if they had it be the Soul Stone, and they had to sort of explain to the Chinese censors why it wasn't the Soul Stone. Because, like I said, when you listen to the dialogue on it, everything they're talking about is it reacts with life. It interacts with life, and if it's something that is interacting with life, because I think they wanted to probably say it was like the life stone. They were going to call it the Soul Stone. They were going to call it the life stone. It's the essence of living things. But that probably got a little too mystical for the Chinese censors, because you get that one guy in the censor office like, I don't like this idea. You're getting a little too close, playing a little fast and loose with our weird morals that we've decided to have. Not that they're any weirder than the morals in American censors, which says, "Oh, sure, 800 bullets, that's fine." But hey, is that a nipple? That looks like a nipple. No nipples. No. Deadpool can gut as many people as he wants, but don't let him show his nipples or her nipples. Yeah, that's. Like I said, I've never understood the hard R of Deadpool, or this insistence that Deadpool had to be hard R, because it's like, oh yeah, because you can't get away with that much violence in a PG. I gotta imagine. Well, it's probably they're dropping F-bombs throughout it. Although
and I think I heard. I think it might have even been a Lil saying. I guess there might be a scene in the beginning, maybe in a gentleman's club. So.
Well, yeah. So there we go. So you get your nipple, one nipple. Because that's American. That's America's weird moral rules. It's like, oh, one nipple. That's technically, and this is actually an interesting thing because I have studied this. Technically, you can have a brief, non-sexualized image of women's breasts in a PG-13 movie. Because if you see Runaway with Tom Selleck, there is actually a whole scene where a woman's walking around topless, thinking she's talking to her husband when Tom Selleck is in the room. But because it's non-sexualized and it's just her walking into the room, it actually got away with the PG-13. And there wasn't an excessive amount of violence in Runaway, which is a fun film about basically robots going haywire. And Tom Selleck is part of the police force that deals with it, which is a much better variation on the robot apocalypse concept rather than robots rising up, but just the fact that robots break and they just start smashing things.
Yeah.
And actually is a great crossover with your idea of a zombie robot apocalypse, is the idea that it's just zombie robots rather than robots wanting to destroy the world. It's just robots that are just rolling forward and killing whatever happens to get in front of them. Sort of like the film Overdrive or Maximum Overdrive, where I guess the machines all started running people over. Led by the Green Goblin, oddly enough. Because it's all connected.
Yeah, I never understood, like you said, I never understood that whole thing. It's like, you can't show a naked body on screen unless it's like a hard R. It's like, everyone has one.
Yeah, well, here's the actual, if you want to actually get into why that is, here's the actual explanation. When you show violence on the screen, it is always simulated violence. Mm-hmm. When you show nudity on the screen, it's always real nudity. And it's an interesting point because if you do simulated nudity, it doesn't get an R. So if you put someone in a rubber suit that's a naked person's suit, they can walk out in that naked person suit, and it's
Like
not.
like in
Yeah,
the X-Men movies.
yeah, Well, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Mystique is naked, but because it's officially she's not naked, she's just blue. It's okay.
And there's no nipples. Yeah.
Well, well, there are nipples. Really, they're just blue
Yeah.
fuzzy nipples. So that's the thing. It's like because it's simulated, it's not. It's okay, and so she can be completely, literally, butt to the wall naked, but in story, but because it's simulated, it's okay. But if it's like you can't like you say. Well, it's when you have a sex scene, when people are together naked, even if there is no penetration shown, or even penetration occurring, it is still a sexualized situation. So from that idea that says sex is not for people to watch on films for some reason, that is what we as a society decided. We said we don't like bad language or nudity, but guns and blood, that's fine.
But you can blow somebody's head off, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting thing about all culture is all cultures are like that. All cultures will have something because essentially culture exists to put rules on us. That's why that is what makes a culture. The culture is these are the things that we accept and these are the things we reject. And so cultures throughout history will have a set of things that these are the things we're going to accept, these are the things that we're going to reject. And they're completely random, but they are the most deepest, truest things to that group. As is often said, that when you look at ancient cultures, the two things, you had sexual mores and then you had food mores. And if you went outside of the food mores, that was just as bad as going outside of the sexual mores. As we've grown as a society, we're far less concerned about what you eat. Although you will still every so often see food used as a moral judgment of people, either of, oh, you're eating that food and that is a bad food to eat, or, oh, that is, like as I've always, one of the great class distinctions in society is that rich people eat snails. And the fact that rich people eat snails shows how different they are because they're eating escargot, which is, it's even French sounding. That's not something you can trust. So, that idea of differentiating people. And then, of course, you can do that the reverse way when you start talking about, ethnic cuisines and, whether or not, they're putting dog meat in the Chinese food or soul food is like the worst part. It's all pig anus, which, yes, but if you've ever eaten a pig anus, that's the thing. But you see this actually. It's very fascinating to me how much food mores have been coming back into our society. Centered around quote unquote artificial and natural flavors, or where a natural flavor comes from. It was an interesting thing. They talk about like castoreum, which is from the scent glands of beavers. And everyone says, oh, you don't want to eat castoreum. When they say it's natural vanilla, it's actually just castoreum. But actually, castoreum costs like $400 an ounce. So they're not actually putting castoreum in anything you're eating, even if it says natural vanilla. But it's such a shocking thing for people. And it's a way to create a moral judgment on someone, saying, oh, if you're eating this, you're really, you're a bad person, and we can separate you from our society. Anyway, but like that, in these weird arbitrary rules, in America, we decided that violence was going to be okay. And for what it's worth, we are a violent nation. We're a nation that grew out of war, that has a very long history of violence and conquest. We're very warlike people, as George Carlin once said. We're very warlike people. We like war. We have a lot of them. So we're much more okay with the idea of violence as both a thing that exists in the world. The world is filled with random violence. And as also as a way to solve problems, because we have solved, we didn't like taxes, so we had a war, and that's the birth of America, we didn't like slavery, or we did like slavery, and so we had a war, and we settled our differences by blowing each other up. And that is the story of America throughout history. It's a very dark and bloody and horrifying thing. And, it maybe speaks a bit to our culture that we're kind of maybe growing out of that we are now looking back at our past and saying, these were kind of horrifying things. And of course, you get a big reaction from those that want to keep things the way they are, who say, no, you can't be saying it was a horrifying thing that we had these wars, that we did these things, because this is our story and our culture and our birth. And of course, it is our story and our culture and our birth. But of course, it will be replaced by another culture eventually, and that culture will have its own weird mores and weird hang-ups about something else. So don't worry, we'll still have moral police telling us why we're horrible. They'll just be telling us that we're horrible for a completely different reason. Most likely that we're eating snails. Anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, yes, Doctor Strange, I think. So one of the most interesting things that came out on Doctor Strange, well, there's two interesting things. One is and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he's the villain and no one's quite sure. They say he is the official villain of the piece and no one quite knows what the villain is going to be. And someone said, oh, well, he must be playing Baron Mordo, except they've already introduced Baron Mordo and I can't even pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try, but he's an African actor, very well known, very well documented. His name is Chiwetel, Cheiwt, and there's a J in there somewhere. And he's playing Mordo, and he's going to be great. And he's discussing Mordo, and he said that Mordo isn't by his nature evil. That both Mordo and the Ancient One see in Strange, and this was great because they really gave this idea of what the crux of Strange is that they both see in Strange a guy who can approach the problems of magic in a completely new way. And this is what I've said before, that Doctor Strange, as the scientist, as the brain surgeon that he got on Hydra's list because of who he was as a scientist and a brain surgeon, not because he was a sorcerer. And it was because of what he unraveled there that had Hydra perhaps want to take him out. And perhaps, like I say, I would really love if his car accident is when Nick Fury is being chased. I would love if he's just part of the collateral damage from something that happens in Winter Soldier. I think that would be a pretty awesome tie-in back to the story, because they can just flash back to him. He's on his cell phone in his, Mercedes, then all of a sudden, a big yellow truck comes through and knocks him over, or Nick Fury powers through an intersection and his car goes flying. That would be just a really awesome thing to see. And so if you have time, put that in there, Marvel. But that's the idea, is that, and of course, and again, it goes into this idea of making magic palatable to the Chinese market, because they have to get through the Chinese market. And the only way they can do that is by demystifying magic. And the way you demystify magic is you make it into science. That's what they did with Thor. That's what they've done with everything else so far. And that's where they have to go. And it will be very interesting to see how they do it. It's also an interesting point of order in this, that, of course, speaking of that, again, that Chinese market, they brought Coulson back from the dead. And Coulson has not been in any of the movies yet. And that may well be why, because they can't have someone return from the dead in the movies. In the TV series, they can have him return from the dead. Even if it is the scientific process of the Tahiti program, it may just get too close to the line for the Chinese censors and say, no, you can't have him come back from the dead, because that's going to make people think that you're doing mysticism, and we can't allow mysticism. So it's an interesting thing how they're going to be approaching this with the Chinese market, with Doctor Strange. I think they've got to get it into the Chinese market. I mean, that's just part of the business model for Marvel now. Although one imagines maybe they can bootleg it in and still make money on it that way somehow, but we'll have to see. Anyway, but what I thought was most interesting, because I've always felt that one of the most interesting things about the Baron Mordo concept is this idea that he was the guy who was supposed to be Sorcerer Supreme, and he was the guy raised from birth. He's the guy who was raised from birth to be Sorcerer Supreme, and Doctor Strange is Harry Potter. He's the guy who had no idea what he was getting into. He just lucks into it, and all of a sudden he gets to be Sorcerer Supreme. And when you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense why Baron Mordo hates him so much.
Oh yeah, I mean, Baron Mordo was in the Union, and then the Ancient One brought in this scab, Doctor Strange.
Exactly, and it's Oh, don't say that, because that's going to get us all sorts of other problems with the Chinese market. So, dealing with the mysticism, I don't know. We don't want to get into labor issues on this. Yeah, but that is basically it. Is that? But Mordo, he had been training his whole life, but Doctor Strange, and again, it's this. This is why Mordo's a villain in his own right, at least in the comics, is that he can't accept the fact that yes, this guy who is just a random guy, but that he, because of his background, knows more about this than even Mordo does, and Mordo has to sort of deal with that, and it's frustrating, and that's why Mordo has this problem with Doctor Strange, and why he always wants to show that he's better than Doctor Strange, but he never can be, because of course magic is all in your mind, and if you are too married to one view of magic, you can never expand beyond that. So that's why Doctor Strange is awesome. Okay. That's a lot of that's some good connections and some good corrections. And we talked a lot about culture and the Chinese market and mores and various variations on those things. But I think that's Phil, is there anything you want to talk about? Any connections you want to make this week? Phil, did I lose you? I hear noise in the background. Phil, you still there? Okay. Test 1, 1, 2, test 1.
I'm here. Something went wrong, but I'm here.
Okay, we're back. Okay. So anyway, is there anything you want to add to our conversation, Phil, before we call it a night?
No, I think we hit it all. Infinity Stones, Doctor Strange, pig anus, nipples.
And I was wrong, but only because Marvel had to do some fast dancing with the Chinese censors. So that's my official statement. But I was wrong, but I should be right. I reject your views and substitute my own. No. And thanks again, of course, to Arnold Castellas. You are a well appreciated member of our family, and we thank you for your correction. And feel free to correct me some more. And anyone else, if you'd like to correct me, you can always correct me at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Charlie Esser, CharlieEesser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. And of course, soon we will be live tweeting Agent Carter with, fingers crossed, hot Agatha Harkness in it. Where can they find you?
You can email me, nightwingpvp@gmail.com, and on Twitter, I'm at nightwingpvp.
Awesome. And that's our connections for this week, friends. Connect with us again. And connect in the all-new Marvel vs. DC podcast we're going to be doing soon, this new year of 2016, with myself, Phil, and Lewis Hellfire. Watch for it, and listen for it too. Good night, everybody.